You're listening to Beyond Wellness Radio, bringing you the cutting edge in health, nutrition, and sports performance. Stay up to date and listen anywhere, anytime on your computer, tablet, or smartphone by subscribing on iTunes. Catch your hosts, Dr. Justin Marchegiani and Barris Harvey, as they answer your burning health questions, as well as interviews from world-renowned guest experts. For more Beyond Wellness Radio, go to beyondwellnessradio.com.
Thank you guys for tuning in to another episode of Beyond Wellness Radio. In today's podcast, we have an awesome interview with Garrett Salpeter. Garrett, we call him the health engineer. He has a bachelor's degree in physics and a master's degree in engineering. Garrett, how's it going today?
Pretty good, Barris. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Oh, awesome. How's it going today, Dr. Justin?
It's going great. I'm excited for this interview as well.
Yeah, it's definitely an awesome interview that we're going to have today because Garrett is an expert in injury prevention, helping people recover from their injuries, and also for performance, because we have a lot of athletes listening into the show, and also a lot of former athletes with some injury problems and want to kind of become healthier or also make a quicker recovery in order to continue competing on some type of level. So, Garrett, what actually got you into health? Because I think I still kind of botched the title of your degree name, your master's degree. But what got you into like going from physics and mechanical engineering into the health field?
Yeah, of course. So I had been an athlete my whole life, focusing primarily on playing ice hockey. And I also had, gone to school and had the physics degree, and even though I enjoyed hockey and I was very passionate about training, I kind of thought that area of my life would just remain a hobby. And towards the end of my time in college, I was set to go to engineering school, and that's actually what brought me down here to the University of Texas, how I got to Austin. And as I was already on that path set to come here, I had an injury towards the end of my time playing hockey in college, and I used the ARP wave system actually to heal from some torn ligaments that I had in my wrist. And it helped me avoid a surgery, get back, weeks or even months ahead of schedule. And it brought together a lot of different concepts for me that I had been wondering how to apply in my own training and in rehabbing from previous injuries. And it made a lot of sense in a way that many of the other traditional therapies and traditional methods of training, they didn't quite add up. So it really, it sort of reignited my interest in this whole field of physiology and human performance, and made me think that, maybe there's something here that I could pursue, in a more real, concrete way. And so as I was down here, still already set to go to engineering school, and as I was down here, and I ended up just getting more and more into it, and I decided to leave my engineering school early. I was supposed to get a PhD, but I decided to take my master's and leave early and open up my clinic here, and that's a little over 5 years ago. So I've been running this clinic for 5 years now, and we've been getting great results. It's been very rewarding and very exciting, and it's a good springboard to kind of explore a lot of the things that we're talking about here, and hopefully continue to improve upon them and push the envelope forward.
Yeah, that's awesome. What's great about that is that it gives you a different perspective than most people in the health field, that you've studied in a different way, that you can look at the body in such a unique fashion.
Yeah. Very cool. So, Garrett, this is Dr. Justin here. You mentioned the ARP wave, and I'm just curious. I use the ARP wave in my practice as well. And I know with your electrical/engineering background that you probably have some inside information of what's really happening when you're using the ARP wave to help heal injuries. Can you go more into the electrical / kind of technical side of things?
Yes, absolutely. And that's one of the things that I first got very excited about, was seeing how this, again, like I mentioned, it kind of brought together a lot of the different things that I had been interested in and passionate about. And so essentially, there's a little bit of physiology that we would have to review in order to understand how the electrical component is actually beneficial. And the physiology is, that around the cause of injury and why injuries happen in the first place. And essentially, whether you're sprinting down the field in the National Football League, or you're carrying your small child, or carrying groceries in from the car, or you're just out for a stroll, force is always entering your body. Your muscles have to be able to absorb the force of that activity.
Mm-hmm.
They have to act as the shock absorbers to protect your joints, protect the other more passive structures and more passive tissues. And when they do that job correctly, you can have a long career in the NFL, or you can do all these other activities in daily life without pain, without any problems. And so the main limiting factors in how well muscles can work to protect you is how much force they can absorb and how quickly they can absorb it. So in order to absorb force, your muscles have to be able to eccentrically contract, or in everyday language, they have to be able to lengthen. So,
right.
So they have to be able to lengthen fast enough to absorb the force that they're encountering, and with enough tension or strength. And, there are some things like a car accident or falling from, 4 stories up that, we may not be able to ever prepare the muscles to absorb that amount of force. But everything else that we're encountering in daily life, absolutely should be able to absorb that force with our muscles to keep us safe. So then the other issue is how quickly they can turn on to absorb that force. And that is the notion of, well, if I'm running or if I'm jumping and I land, between each running stride, that my foot is coming down and it's having to absorb several times my body weight in 1/10, 2/10 of a second. So not only does it have to absorb many times my body weight, 500 to 1,000 pounds of force, but it has to do so in a fraction of a second. So in order to coordinate something like that, the underlying software, the neurological signals, have to be extremely efficient. They have to be able to exert a very high level of control to maximally engage all those muscles in the correct coordinated pattern at the right time with the right amount of force in order to cause this whole process to work efficiently, allow the muscles to work as they should. And so there's a lot that really goes into having to absorb force. And we'll go back up one more point. When I mentioned a moment ago that muscles have to be able to lengthen to absorb force. And so where the ARP comes in is the ARP is essentially a very effective, you could call it a clean waveform that is able to exactly mimic the neurological signals that the body is sending already. And this is where the electronic component ties in with the physiological component that we were just discussing. So most types of electric stimulation, for one reason or another, they're going to be perceived by the body as foreign. And when that happens, the muscles that are being stimulated by that current they're going to go into a protective contraction. They're going to be shortening, whereas, again, we need to be lengthening. What the ARP is able to do is exactly mimic the body's own neurological signals. It does not cause these protective contractions. What actually happens when the ARP is on a muscle, it mimics the signal that's coming from what's called a muscle spindle. Not to get too technical for all the listeners here, but essentially there's a sensor inside of every single muscle that we have, and that sensor detects changes in length. So when muscles are lengthening, which they have to do in order to absorb force, when they're lengthening, these muscle spindle receptors are stimulated. They send signals back to the spine and the brain. And the ARP, all it's really doing is mimicking those same signals. So when we stimulate different muscles, our brain and our spinal cord, all these signals that are being perceived there, they think, oh, this muscle is lengthening just the same way as it would, if I'm running or if I'm doing these other activities. And so we can, by sending those same signals, we can see which muscles are efficient at lengthening to absorb force and which ones are not. And when we find the ones that are not, we know, oh my goodness, though that muscle's not working in this realm that it needs to in order to be able to protect me from injury. Therefore, it could very well be part of the underlying problem, and that's something we're going to want to work on and going to want to address if we want to have a chance in heck of actually, solving this particular pain or injury problem.
Yeah, definitely. So as a follow-up question to that, you talked about the muscle spindles and how it could get a little complex, but it seems to me that there's a little bit difference of just overall muscular strength and this kind of protective nervous system kind of communication that people really don't normally see. It seems like it's a bit simpler, like, muscles either contract or relax. And so for an example, I can deadlift a lot of weight. Like, I have some pretty strong legs, but the other day I kind of tweaked my hamstring running after a ball, kind of hyperextending my leg, and kind of felt like I tweaked my hamstring. So you guys tested me before and noticed some issues with like my nervous system in some certain problematic areas. Could you kind of talk about how, just for an example of an injury, of how maybe somebody could strain their hamstring, or how that works, or how that kind of injury occurs, and what's the difference between like just being muscularly strong and neurologically strong?
Absolutely, Barris. You brought up a fabulous point, and this is one of the biggest things that I try to get across to the people I work with here in my facility, because it really is one of the most common myths or misunderstandings in the training world today, and in the world of athletic preparation, and also injury rehabilitation. And we could phrase it as simply as this: if you say you have a 600-pound deadlift,
mm-hmm.
How long is it going to take you to execute that lift? On average in a powerlifting meet, when someone's doing their max deadlift, they're grinding out a rep. It's going to be 2, 3, 5, 6, 7, maybe up to 10 seconds for a rep. Is that right?
Yeah, usually it takes a little while to lift weight that heavy, and then going through the bottom, you see people going kind of slow on their way up, and then finally hitting it at the top. Yeah,
absolutely. And let's contrast that with what happens when you're on the football field. When you're sprinting down, running your pattern as a wide receiver, each stride, your entire body weight is coming down on one leg. You have to absorb that and then propel yourself for the next stride, all in less than 0.2 of a second.
A second, yeah, exactly.
So essentially, you are running a completely different software pattern. In the maximal lift that you're doing in the gym, you're trying to engage, you are engaging a lot of muscle, and it's a good thing, and it has some potential benefits for sure. But you're trying to do it in, no matter how much time it takes, in several seconds. Whereas when you're doing it on the field, you have to be able to do it time after time after time in a fraction of a second, precisely, and very, very quickly. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure based on that, you can see how one may not necessarily be an adequate preparation for another. Mm-hmm. So the neurological coordination that's necessary in order to execute these movements in 0.2 of a second as opposed to 5 to 10 seconds is completely different. And physiologically, a big part of the difference is in the coordination between opposing muscles. Because when you're deadlifting, you're pretty much trying to just fire everything that you can as hard as you can. If you do that in running, you're going to have some problems. In running, when your leg is in the paw back action, when your leg is being pulled back from the top through to ground contact and then extending back behind you, as everything along the backside of your body, your glute and hamstring in particular, as they're all contracting to pull your leg into the ground, your hip flexors need to elongate. The muscles on the front of your body need to elongate. Mm-hmm. And there's this very precise, extremely high level of coordination that's necessary in order for that movement to be effective that you completely miss out on the way that most people are training in the gym. They think that because I added 100 pounds on my bench press, all of a sudden I'm better prepared to go out and do this other activity. But in reality, based on what we just talked about, the coordination scheme can be completely different. There's no need to actually, relax some muscles while others are contracting, and vice versa.
So to simply So to put that into simple terms for our listeners, it's two different kind of communication things going on with our body, where one is like send and recruit as much energy here as possible, and the other one is kind of more this holistic kind of back and forth kind of communication of this needs to contract, but this has to relax at the same time in a high speed kind of activity.
Absolutely, yes.
Interesting. Well, I think you made some really great points there. I like the hardware software analogy. So it seems like the hardware is somewhat important in sports. I mean, for instance, if I'm not 7 feet tall, I may not be a great center in the NBA, or if I'm not weighing 230 to 250 pounds, I may not be a good linebacker. So hardware is interesting, but you also mentioned a lot about software. And I think, everyone's had the analogy of maybe owning Windows Vista and having maybe a really good processor and lots of RAM, but the computer stinks because the software or the operating system stinks. So I've seen people in the gym that aren't that big, but they lift a lot of weight and they're really fast and they perform well. So that feels like maybe they have they have enhanced software. So can you talk more about this software analogy, and can you talk how you assess that, how you would go about kind of looking and seeing if the software is working, and how would you make the software better?
Yes, absolutely. So I'm glad you caught on to that analogy there, because I really believe that that's one of the keys in all of these processes that we're talking about, whether it be enhancing performance or overcoming injury or anything else in the range here. And it really is a good analogy, because most people think that if I want to get stronger, well, I need more muscle. But in reality, most people are only able to activate 30%, maybe 50% of the muscle that they already have. So without having to add a single additional muscle fiber, you can gain 50 to 70% strength just by tapping into more of the potential that's already there inside of you. It seems kind of foolish to go and try and buy a V8 to replace your V6. If your V6, the real problem with your V6 is that 3 of the cylinders aren't working. You can just repair those other 3 cylinders, and you'll see some significant improvement in the performance of your engine. And there's a couple ways to assess it, particularly when we're talking about working with people who are in pain or have been recently injured. The 2 big tools that we use for assessment are, one is the imbalance assessment, the manual muscle tests. And those are very simply, Dr. Justin, I know you do these in your practice, and I obviously do in mine as well. And, it's pretty common. It tests in the vein of applied kinesiology, so I'm sure several of your listeners will have experienced these. And essentially, you lay down on the table and you'll hold your leg up. I'll push down. I'll introduce force with my hand, and I'm testing your ability to absorb that force, to hold your leg in place, to engage the muscles at the correct time with enough force to resist me. And if they can do that, then that's good. We can move on. If they can't, then that indicates that something is being inhibited or shut down. The neurological signal isn't reaching that area because there's a problem in the software program somewhere. And so then we have to go around and see where those problems are, and through various tests and changing positions and introducing feedback in certain areas, we can discover where that problem really is. And another tool for assessment is the ARP. I mentioned earlier using the ARP to move around on people's bodies when they're injured. Say you have a knee injury, we can start in the area where the pain is on the knee, and the same level of current will feel relatively, mild, not very intense. Then we'll start searching around in different muscles, and all of a sudden we may get to one muscle in the quad or one muscle in the hamstring, and they may have a more intense reaction. And that, again, is because that signal from the ARP is duplicating the exact neurological signals that are being sent by that person's, the muscle spindle, the length sensing mechanism in that muscle. That person's brain perceives that, whoa, that muscle hasn't been doing that, hasn't been lengthening either to absorb that much force or to do so at that velocity, hasn't been doing this in the recent past. And therefore, that person's brain says, therefore, I have to lock down this area. I need to protect it and just give me a chance to figure out what the heck is going on, to sort out this thing, because, something new is happening. And so it's a good way to assess what is working and what isn't working. And between both of these tools, we're able to get a really good sense of where we need to go. And oftentimes it's in a much different direction than you would go in traditional, physical therapy or the other types of rehabilitation that are common out there. So the imbalance, the manual stuff, the manual techniques are really, I would say, a foundation just to make sure that the muscles are capable of working, that the signals actually can get there in the first place. And then with the ARP, we're doing an additional assessment that's kind of a more dialed in, more refined, where we're looking for, okay, we know all the signals can reach this area. Now, which ones can work at a high level or at the level necessary for whatever that person's activity is, which ones can work, and now, which ones are not up to the challenge.
That's really interesting, Garrett. And I've seen you, and I've had the same experience too, and I know you have as well, working with Olympians or professional athletes that are at the highest level in their field, and you do a simple, let's say, a rectus femoris muscle test, and you have this athlete that literally could squat 500 pounds, but the 15 or 20 pounds of pressure from your hand, you can move his leg down like nothing. Can you talk about that aspect? Because I see these athletes, they're like, what the heck did you just do? And it has to do more with the software. Can you talk about your experience with that?
Yes, absolutely. And it's an experience I've had many times, and one that it can be very surprising to the person on the table, because they're just like you said, they're sitting there thinking, how the heck can I not hold my leg up on this test? If I'm able to go and perform this at some high level or that at some high level. And, my counter to that would be, well, if you're able to do that, but you can't do this simple test here, absorbing this, like you said, 15 or 20 pounds of force, then imagine what kinds of compensations you're having to make. Imagine what other muscles and other areas you're having to call upon, because this one is not up to this simple challenge. There's no way it's up to the task of what it needs to do to efficiently complete these other activities. So imagine what kind of stresses you're imposing on other areas to complete those tasks.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Now, real quick, just because, Dr. Justin didn't simplify it for the listeners, he was basically talking about one of the quadricep muscles. Is that what you said, the rectus femoris?
Yeah, it would be that hip flexor muscle that kind of allows you to raise your knee up.
Exactly. So, and I've done this test, and the listeners out there know that that's how I actually met Dr. Justin, was as a client. And when you do it, you'll feel pretty odd, like, oh, my leg muscle is way stronger than Dr. Justin's arm, but he's able to push it down. What's going on here? I liked what you mentioned earlier, Garrett, about the potential of the muscle, and we can actually increase our strength, our speed, and our coordination by a lot without necessarily having to gain muscle. It's almost this idea of the more muscle you have, the stronger you can be, but not necessarily the stronger you are. We see the bodybuilders, and that doesn't mean they're super strong. They can be, but it's more space for potential. And I guess a good example would be people that are Olympians, like gymnasts or boxers or wrestlers that actually want to stay in a lower weight class. So that way they actually need to be stronger, but to limit how much weight they put on. So could we talk about maybe how somebody can maximize and optimize getting that muscle recruitment and making them stronger without necessarily needing to, I guess, gain a bunch of muscle mass necessarily? And then we can kind of follow that up with also just the injury you mentioned, getting injured. How does gaining, making sure that we're communicating with the muscle correctly and preventing the injury? Could we go into kind of both of those in a free flowing state?
Yes, absolutely. I really like a lot of those examples that you brought up. People like gymnasts, boxers, wrestlers who have to maintain very high levels of strength but they can't do it by necessarily always adding muscle because that would send them out of a weight class. Or the example of comparing bodybuilders and powerlifters. You can have two people who are the same weight, a bodybuilder and a powerlifter, and yet the other one can lift 2 to 3 times more because of the way that they're training. And I think a good overlying theme here that'll answer these questions that you're bringing up is to think of our brains as governors. So the biggest thing that our brains do for us is protect us. They attempt to limit our output in order to keep us safe. They want to make sure that we live to see tomorrow. They want to make sure we don't expend too much energy. They want to make sure that we don't fire our muscles too hard and risk, pulling them or tearing tendons off of our bones. Our brains really are set up to protect us. And so in order to tap into this greater level of potential, we need commands to the brain or techniques that allow us to tell the brain, no, it's okay. You can allow this to happen. You can allow, this greater level of force or this greater display of velocity. You can allow these other things to happen. And so there are a lot of techniques that, that we can use to send those commands to the brain to allow the brain to kind of ease off on the brake, to not have to limit our output so much. And so there's a couple examples I'll share. One would be something like the ARP machine, where we're able to send a signal to the brain that these muscles are working at a certain level. That could be lifting a certain load, moving at a certain velocity. And initially, like we talked about before, that in some areas at least can elicit a protective response. And that's basically the brain saying, whoa, no, we're not up to working at this particular level of challenge. But a very cool thing will happen if you leave the current at that level and you move or you do other things to say, okay, brain, it's okay. We're not going to die here. We're going to make it through this. All of a sudden, it'll start to ease off on the brake and say, okay, we'll allow this. And then you can do something really cool. You can turn the current up and you can repeat that process, and you can keep doing that until all of a sudden you've been able to ease off on that brain. You've been able to tell the brain to ease off on that brake enough that all of a sudden it's allowing you to perform at a much higher level, and you're able to tap into more of that potential that you already have inside of you. And in the context of injury, obviously the risk of injury is a great motivating factor for why the brain would want to limit output in the first place. It's going to think, again, we don't want to do this because, you could get hurt. And one of the biggest problems with injury in general, and the way that we work to treat injuries commonly, is that these different compensations from previous injuries are never fully addressed. And so what I mean by that is if someone has a sprained ankle, they, the swelling may go down, the black and blue may go away, the pain may go away, and they'll be declared cleared to return to play. But the brain is, if the brain still senses, there's that ankle isn't quite up to 100%. Say it's your right ankle. Every time you go to put your right foot down, when you're sprinting on the football field, the signal from your ankle is going to say, whoa, we're not 100% stable. So your brain's going to say, whoa, guys, we don't have a stable foundation here. So it's going to limit the output to your quad, to your calf, to your hamstring, to your glute, because it doesn't want to put more force through that leg than can be handled by the ankle. And so that is kind of another example of where this idea of the brain working as a governor or putting the brakes on can happen because of inappropriate rehabilitation from previous injuries. And so that's another reason that we've been able to be very successful in working with injuries, because we're able to find where these compensations are taking place and actually address them. It's not just, okay, these ligaments got stretched out, they got sprained, we need to work to heal those ligaments. It's, yes, we want to accelerate the healing of those ligaments, but we want to, more importantly, look at why that injury happened in the first place and what needs to happen in order to allow that to get back to working at its highest level again going forward.
Yeah, definitely.
So Garrett, it sounded like, just to clarify one point, it sounded like most people are cleared to play again. Most athletes are cleared to play again based upon their hardware being okay, but there's no software clearance. What you're saying is the software is never cleared back in the game, but just the hardware is.
Yes, for instance.
Is that correct?
And a good point, good example of that. I saw a paper. It's a really good example. I can pull it up if anyone's curious in the feedback for show notes here or anything. I can always post the reference.
You can just send that to us. Yeah.
But it was a good paper that, several months after ACL rehabilitation, or excuse me, after ACL surgery, when people have been going through rehabilitation, that athletes will be, cleared to play, but their rate of force development is still well behind where it should be, or where it is on the other leg even. And what that means is there's still some inhibitory influence, or some influence from that injury is left over, a little bit of that brain applying the brake pedal, where they're not able to engage all of their muscle fast enough to actually turn on at the type of speed that they need to perform on the field or on the ice or on the court. And therefore, it indicates very clearly a deficiency in the rehabilitation process, because they're not fully prepared to go back out and meet the demands of their sport. And it's no wonder, therefore, that there's a huge rate of second and third tears and re-injuries and other injuries from various compensations around the first one that was never fully addressed. So there's a lot of interesting issues there and interesting considerations there for sure.
Yeah, awesome. So what I'm hearing, and to kind of clarify this for the listeners, is so if you possibly sprain your ankle or pull your hamstring, you'll have kind of like this compensation pattern where you're limping, and it's obvious you're not going to be able to run your 40 in the same amount of speed. But oftentimes we feel like, oh, I'm able to run in a nice pattern, but we still have these kind of, I guess, micro compensation, where if we were to actually test our total output, it wouldn't be at our max performance, but it's small, so we don't really notice it, and it can cause this continuous where we sprain another ankle or we pull another hamstring, and all these compensation patterns start to add up, and where we start to see these movement problems and these people that become well, nobody can see but my air quotes, but they become injury prone. Right?
Yes, absolutely. That's exactly what we're talking about there, and I like the way you clarify that. And injury prone, I really like that too, because Dr. Justin, I'm sure in your functional medicine work that you see all sorts of different things people are dealing with, where that if they had addressed the underlying cause or underlying problems that made them susceptible, they probably wouldn't have these digestive or hormonal or infectious issues or things of that nature. And it's never just the pathogen, it's the pathogen and how it interacts with the environment of that person's body, right? And
exactly.
It's the same kind of thing on the field of play. If everyone is playing the same game and everyone's having to deal with the fact that players are now bigger, now faster, now stronger, and we think that makes injuries common or inevitable because players are so much bigger, their collisions are so much more aggressive now, and we think that injuries are just part of the game. But there's these things, injury prone. I like that phrase again, Barris. We'll come back to that. There's these things, these underlying factors that if they are not working as effectively as they should, then someone's going to be at a greater risk of injury than someone who's working more efficiently, has a better foundation. They're going to be more prepared to handle the rigors of whatever's occurring out there, and they're going to have fewer injuries. And you'll see, some guys spend their whole careers on the disabled list, and other guys are able to play, with little to no injury, for many years over a whole career.
Mm-hmm.
You made some good points there, Garrett. And one of the big things I think a lot of people can empathize with is maybe being a high school athlete Maybe they didn't go to the college level, but I find a lot of strength and conditioning at the high school level, and maybe even at the college level. It's like we just have to condition you so you get tougher. We got to make it so you throw up afterwards. We practice the whole time, and then at the very end we throw in our conditioning when we're super tired. Can you talk about this working harder over working smarter mentality? And can you talk about what training a nervous system to make it optimal in regarding to getting the best software, how that compares and contrasts to what's typically done?
Yes, absolutely. And that's a fabulous point. And I like that you use the word optimal, because the way that most people think about conditioning is that more is better. If we just drive our athletes into the ground, we make them work, they're going to come out of it tougher, and they will have miraculously achieved all of the benefits that we're looking for, because we just push them. We pushed them pretty darn hard. In reality, it is optimal and not maximal that we're looking for. And yes, we want to work hard, and yes, we want to work smart. And the way to balance all of these factors is through one good framework would be the inverted U curve or the bell curve. So you have, you have if you have a peak in the middle on the left side, you're going from left to right, you're working your way up towards the peak, you reach the peak, and then past the peak, it starts to go downhill again. So the inverted U curve or the bell curve. And, some people are way on the left side where they just don't do enough of anything to achieve results. And, that's a pretty easy one to address. And then some people are on the far right where they've done so much more than they're capable of doing at a high quality that they've broken down. They're causing things to really move backwards, and so they're not getting results either. And somewhere in the middle is that optimal level. And there's some very clear and interesting ways to determine when you're working at that optimal level. And so basically finding the optimal level of training that needs to be done is it's a point at which the stresses are such that they're challenging, they're causing someone to work at a higher level, but they're not crossing over the threshold where they're causing that person to break down. And by that I mean they're breaking down, they can't maintain good position, they're running hunched over, or they're having a fault in their position when they're doing their 10th sprint or their 20th sprint or their 50th sprint, or if they're lifting, you see guys in a high school gym, doing power cleans, and you watch at some of the positions that they're doing, and it's
it's scary.
It's like they're having a seizure. I know.
And so essentially, it's choosing the right amount where you're pushing someone but not causing them to break down because they're excessively fatigued. So simple example. Dr. Justin, you were talking about most coaches will want to do this conditioning at the end of practice, and say they have their athletes running 10 sprints. Well, maybe the first one or two are going to be at maximal velocity. They're going to be giving their all, doing the best of which they're capable. And, after that, the next 7, 8, 9, maybe all 10, they're going to be not able to perform at their max because they're fatigued. And when they're not able to perform at their max because of fatigue, they're going to be running slower. They're going to be using their bodies differently. They're going to be using their muscles differently. Their running form and position will change. The sequence of muscles, there's many things that are going to change. And because that's what they're doing, that's what they're going to adapt to. And if they're adapting to working at this lower level, it's no wonder that most people go through high school and college and they end up, staying the same or getting worse. These are years where they should be making huge, enormous strides in their athletic ability. But a lot of guys come out of college, either slower or only running just as fast as when they entered college. And this is a big part of the reason why, because they're spending so much time adapting to, moving at less than their maximal speed, because very simply, they're just so fatigued from running all these sprints that they cannot possibly work at this highest level. So they're down on the right, on the downward slope of this inverted U curve. And so when we're training people, we want to make sure that we're doing everything right at the highest possible quality, and we're pushing people as far as they can go while maintaining that highest possible quality of work.
And you also, talked about being specific. And I know my experience in high school playing sports, let's talk about football, for instance. You got a running back and you have a lineman, and it's crazy because those two positions have two different demands and two different body types, and to force and impart, you guys have to do the same kind of run and the same kind of time and the same kind of recovery. It's crazy to have these same expectations and same recovery time for each. So can you go into the specific sides of it, and can you also talk about how a lot of the movement patterns that you're doing would be different, and you probably wouldn't even have them do the movements at the very end. You'd probably want to do it when they're as fresh as possible too.
Well,
can you touch upon that?
There's some parts of what you said I definitely would agree with wholeheartedly. There's a little bit of a distinction that I'd like to make on the issue of specificity, because in some ways I would argue that most athletes really need the same things. We all have the same muscles that have to be coordinated in the same way. And to work at a high level, they all need the same high levels of coordination and speed and power and stamina and range of motion and all these other things. And so most training today doesn't even build enough of a foundation in all of these areas that it's really worth going forward and getting specific. So in general, I would say, yes to what you said, with the qualification that we need to do a better job of preparing all of the underlying systems of the body so that everything's efficient. All of the energy systems can support long amounts of work for an entire game, whether you're a lineman or a running back. No matter your position, your energy systems need to support you working at your highest level the whole game. You have to be strong enough to handle all the rigors of the sport, regardless of your position. Obviously, they'll change a little bit, but a lot of these same things people are going to need. These abilities of all your muscles to coordinate and be able to lengthen to absorb force to protect you against injury. So,
but how would you manage the recovery aspect? If someone's nervous system isn't quite as adapted, they may need a little bit more time in regards to recovery. So how do you handle that aspect?
That's a very good question. And so, there's a lot of different things out there. One of the biggest.
Are you using heart rate? Are you just doing kind of just seeing how long? Just trying to find the magic number where they can get back into perfect form again.
So you're talking about between sets or between reps of sprints or things like that. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So
exactly.
Essentially, if you want to have someone being able to sprint at their highest level, then you need to be able to wait to let them recover in between until their heart rates are coming back down, below 100. They're coming back down near to where they are at rest, if not all the way to where they were at rest, whether it be in the 70s or the 80s. And that simply, in this context, the heart rate is a measure of how hard they're working, how much the body perceives it needs to elevate the energetic output to meet the demands of the task at hand. And once the heart rate comes back down, that's a good sign that, okay, energy has been restored and, work can continue. So yeah, absolutely. And some people will recover a lot faster than others, and they'll be able to sprint again sooner than will some of their teammates. But yeah, that you definitely would want to wait until they come back down in this specific example of sprints, so that that they've restored enough of their energy so that they can perform at their highest level possible. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, sounds great. So we talked about athletes and basically some of the flaws in the training, and we want to make sure that we're tapping into the nervous system and training the muscles and the recruitment patterns. What are some? We mentioned the ARP wave. There's also some things that we can possibly do, maybe like negative training, or maybe using resistance bands to get kind of deeper. I know sometimes the bodybuilders they'll do like the drop sets to where they're grabbing a heavy weight, and once they're fatigued, they might use a lower weight so that way they get that muscle recruitment. what are some of the other ways that we can do this on our own, and what are some of the, I guess, the technology that we have out here? I know Keith Norris has like the ARX device, and you have the ARPWave and also the POV. What are some of the ways that we can do this at our home, and what are some of the technologies that we can do to tap into this deeper stimulation of our muscles?
That's a very good question, because in order to enhance neurological efficiency and ultimately quality of life, that really is the question to ask. And the biggest thing that needs to happen is we need to be in good position so that we can be sure all the muscles are working and that everything's coordinated, and that all of the feedback from movement back to the feedback, the sensory signals that come back from the body to the brain, they're all coordinated in such a way that they're going to cause the brain to work at a higher level. So this is a very important topic. And essentially, as long as you can make sure that you're in position and you're turning your muscles on as aggressively as you can, you're challenging your nervous system and therefore causing it to improve, and you are making progress. So there's a couple of techniques. One of the things that we use in therapy here and in training as well is the ISO Extreme. And that is a technique that was developed and named by Jay Schroeder. And it can be a very grueling technique, even though it looks like you're just, to the outside
standing,
observer.
Right?
Yeah, it looks like you're just holding a lunge or a squat position or something. It looks like maybe you're holding a yoga pose. But in reality, what you're attempting to do is pull into position constantly, such that you're continuously attempting to get lower and lower and lower and lower and lower, always using the appropriate muscles to pull into position. And when you're doing that, you are challenging the ability of your nervous system to coordinate all of these muscles in the way that we talked about, where some are having to shorten and others are having to lengthen. And as you fuel these signals, these reflexes over time, you're constantly having to put out energy. You're constantly having to send these signals. And when you do it for an extended period of time, you end up getting very, very, very neurologically and energetically efficient. So that's one thing that can allow you to tap into these higher levels of performance. And the ISO Extreme is a scheme of coordination in which you're actively pulling into position. So let's just take the squat, for example. The squat, you could do it as a wall squat or a hand-supported squat where you're holding onto some handles for balance. Essentially, you want to pull yourself down in a squat position. That means actively using your hamstrings to execute knee flexion, and you're basically trying to stay erect in your torso, keep your shins perpendicular, and try to pull yourself down actively, aggressively, as low as you can, and continue to pull for whatever the amount of time is that you're doing it for. And that is a coordination scheme that's kind of counterintuitive to some people, because you're thinking in a squat, well, my quads and glutes are working.
Exactly. And
in reality, of course they're working, because they are holding you up. If they weren't working, you'd fall over. But the distinction here is that you're pulling in with the opposing muscles, so you're completely changing the neurological signal. Instead of bracing and shortening in the quad and glute by engaging their opposing muscles to pull you into position, you're using your quad and glute eccentrically. They're lengthening, so they're learning to absorb force. They're learning to work in such a way that they can protect your knee and hip joints. And at the same time, as they're lengthening out, they're preparing to work so that they can maximally create force, so that they can push into the ground to propel you further or faster or higher. And you end up getting the opportunity for performance benefits at the same time as you're training yourself to be more resistant to injury. So it's very cool and very efficient. And it's also a foundation to work into some of these other techniques that we can introduce. So for instance, in here, one other aspect of this is that by pulling into the ground, you're actually amplifying the effect of gravity, which is, again, a kind of a counterintuitive notion that can cause someone to question or take a moment to kind of ponder. And you're in position. You could just be bracing there, holding up your body weight, or you could be attempting to pull down so that the muscles that are working are having to not only hold up your body weight, but also lengthen to absorb the force of the opposing muscle. So you're kind of amplifying or making harder this exercise. And another way to do that is to do something called an altitude drop. So an altitude drop, using the same squat as an example, you could step off, start with a 12 or 18-inch box. And what you do is just step off and you land in a squat position, trying to make it, a good squat position like you were doing in that iso extreme squat that we just described. So when you land in that squat position, you're taking that coordination scheme that you developed and you're having to turn it on, if you will. You're taking that coordination scheme and you're activating it in a fraction of a second to absorb the force of your body falling, before you hit the ground or before your joints get hurt or something like that. And so this is a technique that can be very, very, very powerful, because as you get good at this, you could go up and I certainly don't want your listeners trying this right away, but you can go up to higher and higher boxes. You can work your way up to 36, 48 inches, 6 feet, 8 feet. And if you're dropping off of an 8-foot ledge, then when you're landing, you're having to turn on in several 100ths of a second, a very short period of time, to absorb 10, 12, 14,000 pounds of force.
Mm-hmm.
And your brain is going to say, holy smokes, we're falling from this height. We better turn on every single thing that we can in order to protect ourselves. So
Exactly.
you're taking that notion of the brain working as a governor, whereas that usually works against us. Now we're taking that and using it so it's working for us. And you're using your brain to activate everything that you have inside of you so that you're starting to get able to tap into some of this potential, and you're starting to get more out of yourself, like you were talking about in your question. And so, there's other techniques like using the ARP, like using some of those things that you mentioned, the ARX, and there's other techniques that can probably match some aspects of this. But I can tell you that if you're able to do this well, then you're really fully prepared for any of the other stresses that you're going to meet on an athletic field or in daily life.
Yeah, because we know that our eccentric movement has a higher capacity than our concentric movement. So, and like you said, jumping off of like an 8-foot, like something that high and creating that much force, it's going to be a lot more than you can possibly deadlift as well. So, and you mentioned too, it's really kind of counterintuitive to actually work on the antagonist muscle of what's going on. But like you said, it kind of, I guess it clarifies for the listeners, kind of amps and gets your body ready for performance. I guess for an example, oftentimes before I do like a bench press, I notice I'm always pulling on the bar, kind of engaging my back muscle before I go to start my bench press. Is that kind of the same idea of the antagonist muscle is kind of loading up and getting ready to help out with, I guess, the main mover?
Yes, absolutely. And all I would add to that is just take it farther. When you actually unrack the bar on your bench press, you want to pull the bar down the whole way. Use your lats, pull the bar down from the top all the way down to your chest. And when you do that, all the muscles that you need for pressing, your pecs, your anterior deltoids, your triceps, everything is going to be lengthened out so that it's better prepared. And an analogy that I really like is the bow and arrow. When you pull that, you have the bow and arrow, you pull the bow back, you're using a lot of energy and force to load that bow. But when it's back there, when the string is taut, it's loaded, it's ready to go. When you release that arrow just flies out of there because there's so much force loaded in. It's loaded up, it's ready to go. It's like a loaded spring. And most people, when they bench press, they're just resisting with their pecs on the way down. And so when they get to the bottom, it's like a half loaded bow and arrow. But if you pull down, then those muscles are really lengthened out and they're ready to just explode back up. And everything's going to work a lot more efficiently. From the perspective of injury, if those muscles are lengthened out, they're better absorbing the force of the bar on the way down, so less of that force will be at risk of transferring into your shoulder joint or elbow joint. So you're dramatically reducing the risk of injury, And at the same time, by preparing those muscles, you're also dramatically accelerating the opportunity to put force back out on the way up, so you can lift that bar a lot more easily. And, you can just by making a shift like that, oftentimes people can add some weight onto their bench press as well.
Mm-hmm. And a quick follow-up too, because this is kind of like, I don't know if it's probably training. It's two just different types of training, because I know there's like the super slow kind of idea in which you're bringing it down on the negative as slow as you can to fatigue that muscle. And obviously when you do bring it down slow, sometimes it's hard to bring it back up because you fatigued it further. Are these almost like training two different pathways, where one's more training your nervous system, one's more just like metabolically demanding for muscular growth?
That is a good question, an interesting distinction. And the super slow reps, as they're as they're practiced in general, would be typically, and correct me if I'm wrong, but something like 20 or 30 seconds for a repetition. Is that about right?
Yeah.
Oh,
I think it's about
like
8 seconds.
10 down, maybe.
I think
would be the most.
Yeah. If you read Dr. Doug McGuff's book, Body by Science, it's like the 7 to 8
And so
second-ish.
when we do one like that, we would have you actually load up the bar, and we'd have you pulling into position for 3 to 5 minutes. So we're spending an extended period of time where we're having to fire that same neurological pathway over and over and over and over and over and over again to have to lengthen out all the muscles that you need for pressing. So you're preparing this bow and arrow mechanism. And so, we do some of that super slow, I guess.
Sorry, when you say, and sorry to cut you off, when you say you're pulling down for like 5 minutes, are you saying, like, if I'm doing a bench press, am I actively pulling down, but also, because if I'm just going to pull down, it's going to go straight down, am I also actively engaging my chest muscles and pushing it back, so that way it is a slow process, but still focusing on my back muscles?
Exactly. You are,
okay.
Yes, if you were just pulling it down, it would go right away. So you are resisting that with your pec. The key is that by pulling with the opposing muscles, by pulling with the muscles of your upper back, by pulling with your bicep, you're engaging those muscles to work in a completely different way. Instead of shortening and resisting the bar, and in shortening, concentric contraction, where those muscles aren't going to be able to absorb force. That force is going to go into your shoulder and elbow joints. By doing it this way, as you're actively pulling down from the top to the bottom over this much longer period of time, all the muscles that are the pressing muscles that are resisting that, they're lengthening the whole time. So they're learning how to coordinate in this very particular way throughout that entire range of motion. They're just, if you think about movement as a skill, just the same way as anything else, you got to practice how to move correctly. And so if your brain has an opportunity to see every little fraction of an inch of that range of motion to see how to coordinate that correctly, then it's gonna be able to learn that faster than or learn it at all. Whereas in other ways, it wouldn't be able to really learn that at all.
Awesome. Very good points. We're getting close to the end of the show here. I just wanted to make a couple clarifications and get you an opportunity to respond. But I think it's really important, too, to note that we want to make sure people, as they're engaging in maybe these more intense styles of training, that they are in balance, that their nervous system and their software is working optimally. And I know we have similar mentors. Dr. Jay Pietola, he was invited to the World Cup. He was the team doctor for Italy. And I know he's worked with the Italian national soccer teams for the last few years. And according to him, injuries have gone down from 24 injuries per 1,000 minutes to 3 injuries. So that's like 800%. That's pretty insane. So I know making sure people are in balance is very, very important. So can you just talk about, just making sure, the in-balance foundation on top
absolutely.
of the training?
And it's the old question about, well, I want to start working out and I want to get healthy, but my knee hurts or my back hurts or, all that. I'm sure we've all heard that same story many times. Mm-hmm. And it's important to have the foundation. Everything, your muscles have to be able to work to keep you safe in order to be able to perform even, the most entry level of activities, because if you get hurt, you're not going to be able to stick with your program long enough to see results, for sure. So it's a very important prerequisite that you have a foundation like this where at least you're confident that things are able to work, so that you have an opportunity to actually push yourself without knowing that, oh man, I'm going to be hurt for 2 weeks. I might not be able to get back here to train for another 2 or 3 weeks. So yeah, you got to definitely have some of these prerequisites in place. And so, if any of the listeners here have access to, either Dr. Justin or myself or other people who do this type of work, getting checked in a way like that is very beneficial and very useful, and can lay a foundation for a lot of good things after.
That's great. Well, his name is Garrett Salpeter. Again, Garrett has a practice down here in Austin, Texas. His website is arpwaveaustin.com. Garrett, are there more ways people can get a hold of you? I know you are able to see people via Skype. I know you're able to work with people remotely by mailing and shipping out ARPs all across the country and working with them via the internet. But also, are there any special promotions you have available for any people that are listening to the show and want to come down there and work with you via Skype? Is there any options here?
As Dr. Justin mentioned, my facility is here in Austin, Texas, and anyone who wants to come in and try it out, if you mention the radio show, we'd be happy to do your first session with you for $50, which is a significant reduction from our usual initial evaluation fee, and hopefully that'll make it more accessible if you're on the fence about I think some of this sounds interesting and you kind of want to try it out. Hopefully that'll make it a little more accessible, and then the subsequent sessions after that, we can put together depending on what people need to do, we'd be happy to offer a 15% just straight off the top discount for anyone who mentions the radio show.
That's great, Garrett. We all appreciate it. I know anyone that's trying to get to the next level performance-wise or has suffered from chronic injuries, this is definitely an opportunity you don't want to ignore.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks so much, Garrett. We appreciate you having on.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks. Take care.
Pulling down for like 5 minutes, are you saying like if I'm doing a bench press, am I actively pulling down, but also because if I'm just going to pull down, it's going to go straight down, am I also actively engaging my chest muscles and pushing it back so that way it is a slow process, but still focusing on my back muscles?
Exactly. You are,
okay.
Yes, if you were just pulling it down, it would go right away. So you are resisting that with your pec. The key is that by pulling with the opposing muscles, by pulling with the muscles of your upper back, by pulling with your bicep, you're engaging those muscles to work in a completely different way. Instead of shortening and resisting the bar, and in shortening, concentric contraction, where those muscles aren't going to be able to absorb force, that force is going to go into your shoulder and elbow joints. By doing it this way, as you're actively pulling down from the top to the bottom over this much longer period of time, all the muscles that are the pressing muscles that are resisting that, they're lengthening the whole time. So they're learning how to coordinate in this very particular way throughout that entire range of motion. They're just, if you think about movement as a skill, just the same way as anything else, you got to practice how to move correctly. And so if your brain has an opportunity to see every little fraction of an inch of that range of motion to see how to coordinate that correctly, then it's gonna be able to learn that faster than or learn it at all. Whereas in other ways, it wouldn't be able to really learn that at all.
Awesome. Very good points. We're getting close to the end of the show here. I just wanted to make a couple clarifications and get you an opportunity to respond. But I think it's really important, too, to note that we want to make sure people, as they're engaging in maybe these more intense styles of training, that they are in balance, that their nervous system and their software is working optimally. And I know we have similar mentors, Dr. Jay Pietola, he was invited to the World Cup. He was the team doctor for Italy. And I know he's worked with the Italian national soccer teams for the last few years. And according to him, injuries have gone down from 24 injuries per 1,000 minutes to 3 injuries. So that's like 800%. That's pretty insane. So I know making sure people are in balance is very, very important. So can you just talk about, just making sure, the in-balance foundation on top
absolutely.
of the training?
And it's the old question about, well, I want to start working out and I want to get healthy, but my knee hurts or my back hurts or, all that. I'm sure we've all heard that same story many times. Mm-hmm. And it's important to have the foundation. Everything, your muscles have to be able to work to keep you safe in order to be able to perform even, the most entry level of activities, because if you get hurt, you're not going to be able to stick with your program long enough to see results, for sure. So it's a very important prerequisite that you have a foundation like this where at least you're confident that things are able to work, so that you have an opportunity to actually push yourself without knowing that, oh man, I'm going to be hurt for 2 weeks. I might not be able to get back here to train for another 2 or 3 weeks. So yeah, you got to definitely have some of these prerequisites in place. And so, if any of the listeners here have access to, either Dr. Justin or myself or other people who do this type of work, getting checked in a way like that is very beneficial and very useful and can lay a foundation for a lot of good things after.
That's great. Well, his name is Garrett Salpeter. Again, Garrett has a practice down here in Austin, Texas. His website is arpwaveaustin.com. Garrett, are there more ways people can get a hold of you? I know you are able to see people via Skype. I know you're able to work with people remotely by mailing and shipping out ARPs all across the country and working with them via the internet. But also, are there any special promotions you have available for any people that are listening to the show and want to come down there and work with you via Skype?
So,
is there any options here?
As Dr. Justin mentioned, my facility is here in Austin, Texas, and anyone who wants to come in and try it out, if you mention the radio show, we'd be happy to do your first session with you for $50, which is a significant reduction from our usual initial evaluation fee, and hopefully that'll make it more accessible if you're on the fence about I think some of this sounds interesting and you kind of want to try it out. Hopefully that'll make it a little more accessible, and then the subsequent sessions after that, we can put together depending on what people need to do, we'd be happy to offer a 15% just straight off the top discount for anyone who mentions the radio show.
That's great, Garrett. We all appreciate it. I know anyone that's trying to get to the next level performance-wise or has suffered from chronic injuries, this is definitely an opportunity you don't want to ignore.
Got a question for Dr. J? Go to beyondwellnessradio.com/question. Then tune in to hear the answer. Also, if you like the show, review us on iTunes. For more Beyond Wellness Radio, go to beyondwellnessradio.com.